the spiritual aspiration and loving cooperation which have characterized the organization from the beginning and which are repeatedly brought to life here. It meant a lot to me that Claudia was so honest. She had more to say, of course, but I felt she had tossed me a lifeline. I finished my work on Women of Covenant while employed part-time at Smith Institute for Latter-day Saint History at Brigham Young University, the entity that had served as successor to Arrington's History Division from 1980 to 2005. In 2002, after I was named Smith Institute Director, the women's history specialists at the Institute, Carol Cornwall Madsen, Jenny Reeder, and I, wanted to more firmly establish Latter-day Saint women's history at BYU. So we called together a group of formidable consultants, including Aline Clyde, Sheiko Akazaki, some BYU faculty, Laurel Ulrich, and Claudia. Our collective brainstorming soon resulted in the formation of the Mormon Women's History Initiative Team, which 20 years later is still a significant sponsor of Mormon women's history projects. The team supported numerous projects underway at Smith Institute, including annotation of the Nauvoo Relief Society minutes and other documents eventually published in 2016 by the Church Historians Press under the title, The First 50 Years, Key Documents in Latter-day Saint Women's History. Most of the projects came to fruition much earlier, including the Smith Institute Summer Seminar for Sisters, directed by Claudia in 2003, which happily we'll learn more about today. Claudia also became part of the Institute's 2004 lecture series. I think this is one of the first Claudia lectures. To Claudia Lauper Bushman, who has played a significant role at many points in my long journey as a historian of Latter-day Saint women, I express my profound thanks and admiration. Thank you.
Our next esteemed feminist mother figure is Susan Howe. Susan Elizabeth Howe was an early writer, very early writer and staff member of Exponent 2 in 1978, and she served as its editor from 1981 to 84. Susan is now a retired BYU English professor and an esteemed, highly accomplished poet who won the Association for Mormon Letters Lifetime Achievement Award and has published 3 collections of poetry, including Infinite Disguises with BCC Press. Her poems have appeared in The New Yorker, Poetry, Shenandoah, and other significant journals. And the title of her comments is The Genius of Claudia Lauper Bushman.
It's a pleasure to be here today. And I have to say, the first issue of Exponent 2 announced that Judy Dushku was the Woman of the Year of Suffolk University. And it said that she was beloved of both faculty and students for her intellect and her generosity and her warmth. So I thought I would add that. You know, I'll do a more serious paper for the book, but what I'd like to talk about today is Claudia's genius in marrying Richard Bushman. She wrote a great essay about it for the BYU Studies when I was an editor there. And I'm going to quote from that because it's such a great story. She said that until he was Dick, he became Richard in 1992. But at that time, he was Dick Bushman. So Dick was at Harvard, and then he was called to the Eastern States Mission, the headquarters of which was in Cambridge, right where he went to school. So he was back. The students already knew him and talked about him, giving Claudia a very favorable impression. During Dick's mission, they met once when he came to a Sunday evening gathering of LDS students. He said that for him, it was love at first sight. Claudia said that she liked that he was thoughtful and articulate, but his red hair grew down over one eye, and she thought that he looked like a romantic poet and wished that he'd cut it. When he came back to Harvard in the fall after his mission, Claudia said their relationship began, quote, in deadly earnest. She said, "He was never very nice to me. He was stern in his invitations as if this were an unpleasant duty that he had to fulfill. We usually had study dates at the old Wellesley Recreation Building. He seemed so much mature and serious than I was that we could hardly carry on a conversation. I knew he disapproved of me. I was always surprised when he called and asked me out, or in, that is, to the rec hall. He never took me out to any nice places. I, who had been used to going to every football game, every dance, and every concert, found my social life much straitened. There was certainly no romance. Always our conversations were painful and awkward. We could hardly talk to each other at all. After a while, each date would be followed by a letter in which he would bawl me out for something or lecture me on something else." Later, Claudia said, "I was sure he considered me a nice but very dull girl." Then, November 18th, 1954, during Claudia's junior and Dick's senior year, he came to Wellesley and suggested that they take a walk. They went around Lake Waban and sat at a bench called a spoon holder because they held the spooners, which were the smoochers. And this is the account she writes about that. "On that fated evening, Richard sternly and seriously proposed marriage. I was astonished, completely surprised and undone. He said that he loved me and had for some time. I had already had a few proposals and could read the clues, but I never saw this one coming." She said, "Instead of leaping up in enthusiasm as any other girl would have done, I wondered if he was serious, saying that he did not know me at all. I was shocked and unhappy that he could be so blind as to choose me, but thrilled to be loved by such a man. I came home quite dazed, but very happy. Marrying him was a new idea." Dick remembers a different story. He remembers that Claudia accepted him and they were engaged. Claudia said, "I thought we had moved into a new limbo. We continued our tortured relationship." They met during their Christmas vacation for New Year's Eve at Dick's home in Salt Lake City. He gave her a kiss on the forehead when the new year arrived. And again, Claudia felt tongue-tied and unhappy that she couldn't feel natural and talk with him. When they got back for the new year, Claudia had a disagreement with one of her English teachers and wrote what she thought, was the right answer instead of what the English teacher wanted her to write on the exam. And the teacher gave her an F and she got a D in the course. And she was so upset about this because she didn't know how she could tell Dick, who was graduating magna cum laude, that she got a D. That night they went to an MIT dance at a hotel, and Dick could tell she was upset. When she finally told him what happened, he said that was of no significance, and he was relieved that it wasn't something serious. Claudia's class dean, Miss Jones, called her in to talk about her grades. Her English teacher had described it as an inexplicable total collapse, never, of course, admitting their disagreement. Miss Jones asked Claudia if she had any personal problems, and Claudia admitted that she did have some personal stress in her life. So Miss Jones arranged for her to meet with a psychiatrist. She said, this was serious because it was $25 an hour, so I wasn't going to waste his time. So she told Dr. Snyder everything that was troubling her. And he responded by saying that he thought Writing the exam in that way was an unconscious attempt to get back at the professor, that there were better ways to do it and that he could not get excited about the final grade. Claudia said, "It was magic for me. I rose from the chair a new person. I left all my troubles on the floor. I felt cleansed and renewed. I was myself again. I was calm and happy and ready to commit myself to marriage." So Claudia wrote Dick a frank and loving, quote, frank and loving letter. And when he got it the next day, he sent her yellow and white roses. And that afternoon came to Wellesley, and they walked to the same spoon holder and planned their future together. And this is what she wrote about that. "Trust was first mentioned. We are to be complete and total confidence and tell all. We are to respect each other and not only to not make fun of our love or take it lightly, but also to never flirt or pay undue attention to anyone else. We are to be constantly alert of ways to help others and of ways in which to disseminate the gospel. We plan nice things that we do for our children. Take them out, teach them languages, learn them the social graces, stimulate their precocious minds by teaching them the same things we were learning, and we would be civic leaders and good hosts and kind to all." And what's interesting is that, they many more accomplishments, but the accomplishments about family, about their relationship, and about how they were always good civic leaders as well as church leaders, that was all true. They were to be married in the fall, and Dick came to California so they could be together for the summer. He stayed in the Laupers' basement. Claudia said that her father was very impressed that Dick got a job, worked hard, and helped out around the house and at church. They had a pre-wedding reception in Claudia's Sunset Ward Cultural Hall and then drove back to Utah to be married. Claudia said that as they pulled away, her mother turned to her father and said, "I wonder if she's good enough for him." She said, "My own mother." But she ends her piece by saying, "For many, many years, we have considered ourselves to be very fortunate in our marriage to each other." I agree that they are a remarkable couple and have given each other the support to do extraordinary things apart and together. They raised a wonderful family. I only know their oldest son, but he's wonderful. And as the focus today is on Claudia, some of the things that she has accomplished are to complete her PhD and turn her dissertation into a scholarly book, to edit and contribute to the Pink Issue of Dialogue, to edit and contribute to Mormon Sisters, to become the first editor of Exponent 2, and to initiate the Claremont Graduate University Oral History Project on Mormon women in the 20th and 21st centuries. And edit with Caroline Klein a book of topical essays analyzing the response of women interviewed, titled "Mormon Women Have Their Say." I'd like to use the rest of my time to explain the Oral History Project. It was started in 2009. Interviews were carried out by students in the Graduate University School of Religion and by women in the LDS community. And some women sent in their own stories when they heard about it. The requirements to be interviewed were to be female, to have a significant connection to the LDS Church, and to be willing to tell one's story. Those interviewed included women from their teens to their 90s, beauty queens, CEOs, high school dropouts, PhDs, women on welfare, returned missionaries, divorcees, temple workers, and excommunicants. Interviews came from all over the United States and 10 other countries, including interviews that were translated into English. The goal was 200 interviews, and at the time the book was published, they'd completed transcribing 160, and there were over 2,500 single-spaced pages of transcripts. At the time the book was published, the histories were not available for research, but I assume that they are now. Claudia writes in the introduction, "I find more individual thinking and less conformity than I would expect. People speak openly. They know the rote answers, but they say other things. I see lots of doctrinal creation as people make sense out of their traditional beliefs and their experiences. I see lots of free agency, dependence on divine sources, and bypassing marital and structural authority. I see defiantly strong women who have overcome early guilt. There is lots of pain, lots of triumph, and many specific answers to contemporary questions. So Claudia has just had a remarkable life and contributed so much to so many. And what I think is one of the most important is that she has helped change women's sense of personal authority and self-worth. Maybe not institutionally, that's not happening, but it's certainly happening on an individual level. And so it's a joy to be here and to honor Claudia today.
You can see how, and you'll see over the course of the day, how many women of many different generations Claudia has mentored. Our next distinguished historian feminist mother figure is Martha Bradley Evans. Martha Evans is a historian and longtime faculty member here at the University of Utah. She's the author of several articles and books, including For Zinas, A Story of Mothers and Daughters on the Mormon Frontier, and Pedestals and Podiums, Utah Women, Religious Authority, and Equal Rights, and many other works and books, important works. She has served on the board of Signature Books for over 30 years, and she is the director of the Smith Pettit Foundation for Mormon Studies. The title of her comments is Sharing Our Stories.
I'm so happy to be here. As I look across the room, there are just so many people I've loved for my whole lifetime, it feels like. And, you know, more than friends, just like more than sisters, a longtime student friends, and really amazing privilege to be here. My journey into Mormon history began with Mormon sisters and a class taught by Jill at BYU's evening school. This was my stepping stone back into education after a couple-year gap, supported by a small scholarship that just meant the world to me from continuing ed. Juggling 2 young children with one on the way, the prospect of having a few hours every week to delve into something other than changing diapers and playing with blocks ignited a fire in me. I had worked a copy of Beginner's Boston, I see Carol Ann is here, to death after a summer living with a group of friends in Jill's apartment in Boston, following the recommendations for adventures and imitating endlessly the artwork. I was vaguely aware of the book that had put the group that had put that book together, but I was way out of the exponent 2 loop. By then, happily unaware and living my quiet life of raising children, making imitation meat out of gluten. Did any of you do that? Sewing, knitting, and drawing. Mormon sisters introduced me to a world and a subject matter I hadn't explored before, but I worked that book like it was essential to my salvation, underlining and tagging corners of pages, following sources through footnotes, trying to magnify it and expand my own imagination. Claudia and Cheryl and Judy and Jill became rock stars to me, certainly women I wanted to be like, or at least to emulate. Since then, like many of you, I've probed the intimate writings of countless women, their journals, their letters, poetry, and essays. Their stories have never failed to stir me. One of the very first women I encountered was Margaret Smoot, Abraham Smoot's first wife. Her account of welcoming new wives into their home, the emotional toll that took, and her struggle to make plural marriage work resonated with me. And I found myself transported to her home on Provo Center Street, sharing her kitchen, sitting room, and garden with women who were once strangers, but then became sister wives. Many of my books have relied on these women's sources, the four Zinas, pedestals, and podiums, Kidnapped from That Land, the autobiography of Mabel Allred, are built on the lives of women. My Glorious in Persecution book about Joseph Smith was largely motivated by the desire to understand the narrative world that pulled women into plural marriage, even when it was beyond view and evolving through Joseph's expanding understanding of the doctrine. And I've lived with those women in my head, their movement through their homes and communities, the way they raised their children or served their neighbors, the ways they committed themselves to their religion for decades. And I imagine Eliza and Zina driving a wagon from one small rural Utah town to another to meet with Relief Society women, to talk to them about the important role they played in the church and building community, of women's rights and their obligations. Or Mabel Allred, who had periodic nervous breakdowns as she struggled to live in a family of sometimes more than 5 wives. Share a husband, raise children in private compounds or homes, and repeatedly move to get away from legal pursuit. Or women like Emma Lou Thane, who shared her experience of the International Women's Conference, what she called her own Vietnam, but committed to a life of faith and grappling with her sense of herself as a woman and changing norms and pressures in the 1970s and 80s. Claudia, a masterful storyteller, has left an indelible mark on my life through her commitment to sharing women's stories, including her own. And most recently, I found myself immersed in her wonderful book, I, Claudia, drawn in by her authenticity, the parallels between her life and mine, her fervent embrace of life and its characters. Like Claudia, I sang and danced my way through a series of ward houses, often choreographing, performing in, or writing ward shows or special events. I danced in Promise Valley for a whole summer outside the church office building. And I mentioned this to Rick Turley once, and he said that was his favorite summer date. The constant refrain of crickets filled the summer of my junior year. Like many of you, I gave dozens of talks from the pulpit and taught Sunday school and Relief Society or primary. And though I can't read music, I would enthusiastically lead the singing at primary. And my favorites were The Spirit of God, Like a Fire is Burning, and There is Sunshine in My Soul Today, or other songs that my mother used to sing to us in the evening when our father was gone serving in various church leadership callings. Those experiences were so much about how we grew up or grew into our lives as Mormon women. And importantly, they were about how we developed skills and tamped down our fears and expanded our view of the world. Those 2.5-minute talks with notes on note cards, the scriptures we memorized or recited, the service projects we organized or managed, and all those experiences that weave through Mormon culture shaped us. They made us more useful to the world. And I've thought about this so often as I've lived a life in public service. Claudia's life is a testament to the power of determination and balance. She managed to raise a large, happy family, write books and articles, earn a master's and doctorate's degree, volunteer, work in the community, and achieve so much. Her list of accomplishments is long, and she's brought her own set of unique skills and talents and relationships and commitments and dreams together to excel in all aspects of her life. And I found her story to be so truly inspiring. Her life is also marked by adaptability. Each new home or ward, new city or place was enriched by her engagement as she planned events, rallied for causes, mobilized workers, and organized. Like her, I have stumbled into opportunities, but maximized them by working hard, being good at projects and organizations, and being creative. And Claudia was really fun, and I think that goes a long way. We both have had daughters who confronted cancer. My youngest daughter, Caitlin, has a rare kind of inoperable tumor, a sarcoma that she's been battling for 4 years. She has chronic, unbearable pain, and it's a dreadful and painful journey. And Claudia's words in her book were so meaningful to me. I understood her mother's heart that went through that difficult time with her beautiful daughter. So now, kind of continuing this spirit of storytelling a little bit more about my career in life. There have been two main driving forces that have inspired my scholarship and my career. First of all, I'm really, really curious about the human experience, and that's always driven my choice of subjects, my teaching, my administrative work, and the kind of human I try and be. And secondly, and related to the first, is my effort to try and understand better ways of being together in community. For me, the life of a scholar has been largely a solitary pursuit, and honestly, for me, this was part of the appeal. I chose art history and then history as fields of study because I could spend my time in books and then eventually in archives, and that's where I'm best. I could also wrap my reading around my children's lives, and in hindsight, I would have benefited from being in a scholarly community, a writers group, where I could have gotten feedback. Fred Asplund told me once that he thought I was just like a Mustang, that I would run and run and run and run, and he hoped I wouldn't just drop dead. But I've always thought that rather being a Mustang, I think of myself as a backup singer. I get real pleasure from helping the people around me, including my bosses, succeed. I've relished the mentoring aspect of my administrative jobs, helping younger leaders to grow and expand as human beings. And the best part of what I've done in my scholarship, my career, has been helping young people achieve their potential and become more. And I have taught widely across the curriculum, from history and architectural history, and most recently urban form. I've had more than 11,000 students in my career, which is a whole bunch. But what's been most important and rewarding to me is when I've helped students see more and be more visually and intellectually engaged in their visual environment. My best ideas have come to me accidentally. And I think you have to be fired up about your idea to really make something sing. For example, I first heard about the Short Creek raid on the news, and I could not believe that it happened in America. Mary Woodward brought me a box of Zina materials, primary sources, and laid them in a fan in front of me on her dining room table. She was such a tease. And attending the IWY conference in 1977, as many of you have mentioned, Dorothy Solomon giving me her handwritten mother's autobiography. And recently, my book about the spaces of communal religious groups came from decades of attending the Communal Studies Conference and keeping my eyes wide open in the very special spaces we visited. I applied for my last leadership job as the Vice President of Academic Affairs, the Senior Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs over undergraduate education, because of a Derr I heard in a comment that C.C. Foxley, who was then the Commissioner of Higher Ed, made to a group of honor students when she said, "When a door opens for a woman, you need to walk through it. You can look around, and you can choose to back out, but at least enter the room and check it out." And I applied for my job before that as the Dean of the Honors College because of something Irene Fisher, who was president of the Utah Coalition for ERA and the Benyon Center, she said that it was so important that women step up when an opportunity presents itself, that we need to make sure women are in the pool and considered real candidates. And I had my teaching job at the University of Utah because Reba Keel, remember Reba, told my dean, Bill Miller, that he should consider having me come and teach for the School of Architecture. And for some strange reason, and I love this about women, we do this, she remembered that I'd done a master's thesis on architecture and also had taught classes with 1,000 students each at BYU, which then led to 15 years of teaching the Introduction to Architecture class that usually had around 400 students. That was such a privilege. I was able to go to school, graduate school, write books, do scholarship, because my older children were willing to tend the younger children. sit on my lap when I study, draw in my history books instead of coloring books, go with me to conferences, tolerate endless visits to religious sites, and talk about architecture every single time we were in the car. And everyone in my family has been willing to share me with others. I had my son Jason before I began my junior year in college, and had morning sickness with my daughter Elizabeth during my final quarter before graduation. I had my daughters Rachel and Emily while I was working on my master's degree, and my daughter Caitlin and my son Patrick while I was working on my PhD. It was a miracle I finished school. And if you remember those days, it was so much more important for my husband to finish school. Mine was always the kind of second on the list. But I kept at it because I loved it so much. I could taste it, and I still do. It is the most life-giving work. Education opens up the whole world to us and helps us imagine more. There's actually something quite sacred about working with a student who discovers something new about themselves or develops new strengths. We must assume thousands of students like me didn't believe they deserved to be in school, but worked their hearts out to be in our classrooms. And I think we owe so much to them to inspire, transform, and engage them, and to help them change their lives. I've been incredibly blessed. I have a family of rock stars. I have a circle of friends who are committed to social justice. That's a deep passion of mine. I'm passionate about the work I've done. Fantastic opportunity to impact the lives of young people. I grounded my administrative work, and I think this is such a Mormon characteristic of me, in what some might call a mindset, but it's actually a philosophy. It's called affirmative inquiry. With affirmative inquiry, you start with what is possible, not with obstacles. And this has always been at the core of what I've tried to do. And I know you all know someone who always starts with why you can't do things, and they go smugly down the list like we weren't smart enough to figure it out. I've tried to perpetuate instead cultures that value assets and strengths and what is right and good, and building on that. For me, the most powerful image of what I tried to accomplish was more like a circle, not a hierarchy or a triangle or a pyramid, but good human beings sitting around a table, imagining more, imagining what we can do for each other, imagining a world that is different because of what we share. I've always held out an idea of the world I want to inhabit, one of imagination and kindness, the kind I want my children and my grandchildren to live in. And I think it's the only future hope we have for the future that we can build together. In 2004, I received the Park Fellowship to conduct a case study of modern day communes and intentional communities in the Bay Area. And I visited more than 100 co-housing units, interviewed dozens of participants, and saw infinite variations of living together in community. And I remember one conversation in which I asked a middle-aged woman why she had chosen to live this way, where she turned her back on private ownership and committed to sharing all of her meals, sharing common spaces, gardens, workshops. And she said that she had always yearned to find a better way, to find a more decent and conscious way to be with others, to find and help build a true community where every member sacrificed something for the good of the whole. And I remember having goosebumps just run up and down my arms. This really resonated with me. And it was what I had read in the letters and diaries and journals of the women of the groups I've studied over all these years. And I think it's what drew women like Zina or Mabel or Margaret to follow Joseph Smith's vision for life. It seems like a basic human need, association. That's why we're here today, right? Imagining better ways, imagining the potentialities, the possibilities, finding ways to bring out the best in each other and our institutions. We want to get it right. I've tried, and I guess it's a variation on the work of the communal religious groups I've studied, to imagine the possibilities in the context of communities of really talented individuals, imagining better ways of being together and growing as individuals. It's been incredibly rewarding, meaningful work that for me has been based on principles and values and a profound hope for better ways. So in conclusion, and I was remembering this when Judy was talking, I heard that when I was chosen to be the Dean of the Honors College, that some woman in a kind of snarky way said, no, not her, she's a Mo housewife. And, you know, I think that's actually what was most cool about me. And I think I've just told you all the reasons why, right? We can organize, we're positive. All of those things were strengths, not liabilities. I was a Mo housewife, and that was part of what I brought to the table. And I played with the big boys for the next 30 years, and I think I had a distinguished career. I found that it's essential to follow ideas that seize us or inspire us and others, that we be ourselves, be authentic in everything that we do. So if you're a Mo housewife, don't hide it. That we work hard and work well, and that we work together. Thank you.
Thank you. All of the women on this panel have influenced and mentored me over the years. And my work would not have been possible without these women and Claudia and Laurel and others. I'm Maxine Hanks, and I'm a U of U alumna here in Gender Studies and History. I got to work with Dean May years ago. And I co-taught the first Mormon Women's Studies course here at the U of U with Dr. Bella Evans from 1988 to 98. And my first book, Women and Authority, Reemerging Mormon Feminism, was created as a text for our class that we taught together. I'm a historian and theologian whose work focuses on religion, on gender in religion and Mormonism. The title of my comments is Legitimizing Mormon Women's History and Studies. And as a historian, I love context. I like to talk about context. So I thought I would share, briefly, a few important contexts in which Mormon sisters emerged in the 70s. And then I'll share 5 or 6 reasons why it was momentous and influential. And then I'll end with some personal influence that the book had on me. One important academic context for the book was the cultural turn of the 1970s, a shift in methodology and theory to see deeper cultural social processes and unseen, suppressed, ignored, missing voices, lives, and levels of history and society that we hadn't seen before, to uncover a more inclusive picture of the past and of society. Along with this, the new history that emerged in the 60s and 70s departed from traditional narratives and detached reciting of past events with major male players at the center, instead embracing descriptions of relationships, dynamics, motivations, and institutions and how they emerged. One more secular context at that time was second wave American feminism of the 1960s and 70s, emerging first in academia and then going to popular culture with works like Kate's Sexual Politics and Ms. Magazine in 1971, Sexual Politics in 1970 and Ms. in 1971. And Laurel's fine essay and dialogue talks a lot about this. Meanwhile, aside from the secular contexts of Mormon sisters, a very primary context was the LDS church culture of the 1970s, which was a low point for women in its 140-year history, when Relief Society authority and self-management was brought under male priesthood correlation from 1970 onward, as seen in the loss of the Relief Society magazine in 1970 and the shift from President Bell Spafford to President Barbara Smith in 1974. Another primary context for Mormon sisters was Mormon studies and its own new Mormon history, using tools of the cultural turn and the new history and secular academic culture to transform our traditional views of LDS history, which emerged in the Mormon History Association in 1965 and Dialogue in 1966, Journal of Mormon History in 1974, and on. Yet these venues, emerging in Mormon studies, were still male-centric, wherein women's history and experiences and feminism were largely ignored or absent. Into these American contexts and Mormon contexts, Mormon sisters emerged in 1976, legitimizing Mormon women's history, studies, and feminism in ways not done before. And this is why we're celebrating a book that is 50 years old. Mormon Sisters was not alone. It had its own context of Mormon feminism that was surfacing in the late 1960s and early 1970s via groundbreaking projects created by Claudia's circle of Boston area Mormon feminists in a triptych or trilogy of feminist publications: the Dialogue Pink issue in 1971, Exponent 2 in 1974, and Mormon Sisters in 1976. As the group's resident historian, Claudia edited all three publications with the help from her feminist sisters. She said, "I suppose the pink issue gave us confidence that we could do more things. Our little group of housewives began to be taken seriously, one of the great aims of our lives." This prompted Judy Dushku to organize a class in Mormon women's history for the Cambridge Institute in 1973. So the dialogue issue led to the Cambridge Institute classes. And those class lectures led Susan Kohler to discover the women's exponent in the Widener Library. And that discovery led to the creation of the Exponent 2 in 1974. And those same Institute lectures that Judy called for formed the chapters of Mormon Sisters in 1976. So they're all connected. And I love those three key points that I like to call the triptych of the emergence of second wave Mormon feminism. Some Mormon scholars tend to view Mormon feminism as having begun in the 1970s and having been motivated or shaped by secular feminism, second wave feminism, and Mormon studies itself. These are all partly true, but these were not the source nor the impulse for Mormon feminism, which was its own project, and which existed from the beginnings of the church. Mormon feminism didn't originate in the 1970s, but it became publicly visible then. I want to mention now about 5 reasons why this book is so significant, or was so significant at its time. First, Mormon Sisters signified the cultural turn and new history within Mormon studies and history, where new revisionist histories were recovering the missing stories and dynamics in our own history. Mormon Sisters was offering women's missing narratives. Leonard Arrington said, or confessed, I should say, the role of women in Mormon history has been overlooked. So Claudia's dedication of Mormon Sisters was for Leonard Arrington, who takes us seriously. Mormon Sisters also pioneered intersectionality. These women understood that their gender, religion, and culture intersected in dynamic ways as women, mothers, writers, scholars, and church members. This feminist turn in the new Mormon history, I like to call it the feminist turn, was what I call a new Mormon women's history within the new Mormon history. Another significance is the shift in focus. Mormon Sisters shifted the focus from a male-centric history and narrative to women-centered narratives and experiences, where women and their own history are the central subject. As historian Anne Browdy has shown us, women are central in the creation of religious communities. They are not marginal. I remember an essay from Laurel Ulrich a long time ago that described this movement, this shift in focus as moving from women as absent in history to finding women in history to finding women as history. Mormon Sisters, along with Exponent 2 and the Dialogue Pink issue, moved the marginal status of women in Mormonism to the center of Mormon experience, a seismic shift at that time. Women were no longer seen as scripted by male authority and narratives. Women were writing their own narratives from their own center and their own lives. Another point of significance is the feminist challenge to male bias and sexism that was evident in both the church and liberal subcultures, resulting in pushback, criticism, and warnings from male church leaders and even some male journal editors about women's writings in Dialogue and Exponent 2. A lot of Mormon men didn't understand the feminist perspective of Mormonism, nor a woman's perspective of feminism. Yet both were real and authentic to female experience in LDS religious culture. Another significance is the feminist scholarship in Mormon Sisters. The articles in Mormon Sisters applied feminist and scholarly lenses to LDS women's history and then published these in book form. This gave women's history and studies grounding, gravity, objectivity, legitimization, and it established women's studies in Mormon studies. Another significance is that it inspired further work. Mormon Sisters set a precedent that encouraged other women historians and feminist scholars to create other anthologies. For example, Sister Saints in 1978, Women's Voices in 1982, Sisters in Spirit in 1987, and Women in Authority in 1992, along with other books and countless articles that came after. One last significant point is that Mormon Sisters linked the past with the present. As we all learned in grad school, the work of history uses current lenses and tools and knowledge to revisit and re-examine the past. So history is ever evolving as our present perspective reshapes the past, and our new understanding of the past reshapes our present. The past and the present are connected in a mutually reflexive relationship. When I first saw the cover of Mormon Sisters, just seeing the cover, the picture of those Mormon sisters, our foremothers, brought the past alive for me. It was almost like an active portal of connecting with those women. Mormon Sisters connected the past and the present and future generations of Mormon women by recovering our shared history and our common concerns that transcend history. Last, I'll mention some of the personal impact on me of Mormon Sisters and Exponent 2. My own journey ran parallel to the feminist triptych that I've identified between 1971 and 76. Those were my high school and first college years in which I was often accused of being a woman's libber. The dreaded title. They didn't even say feminist back then. You were a woman's libber. In 1975 and 76, as the Associated Women's Student columnist for the Ricks College paper, I was wrestling with the very same questions Exponent 2 writers were wrestling with, far away in Boston, before I even knew about them. In January 1976, while planning and co-chairing the Ricks Women's Conference for March, I accidentally discovered Exponent 2 on the shelves of the Ricks Library, thanks to the funky, wild art of Carolyn Person that covered the cover. And it was peeking out of, just a corner was peeking out of the stacks at the library. And I thought, what is that doing at Ricks College? I had to know what it was. And we are very fortunate because Carolyn Person is here with us today, right there. That woman changed my life. For the first time, I knew I wasn't the only feminist in Mormonism. There were others like me. It came as a real surprise. So this was just 4 months before Mormon Sisters came off the press that I discovered Exponent 2. I didn't get to find the book until after my mission, when I was working at 7th East Press and attended Sunstone and got a copy of Mormon Sisters and Women's Voices by Jill Derr. Again, those were life-changing moments for me to discover those two books. Mormon Sisters gave me the precedent and confidence to compile a new feminist anthology in 1988. I knew feminism was inherent in LDS tradition, so I wanted to gather evidence to show it. I also wanted to reclaim the F word as a positive label and take away some of the stigma that it had attained after Sonia's excommunication, because feminism is ours. We have our own homegrown feminism in Mormon history and tradition. Yet the 1980s were the aftermath of the Sonia Johnson excommunication in 1979, which intimidated Mormon women away from feminism and from the word itself. Yet three voices stood out, reclaiming the F word in Mormon culture. Claudia said in the Dialogues Women's issue that she was committed, that this Dialogue Pink issue was committed to the compatibility of the gospel and feminism. And Claudia wrote in Exponent 2 that Exponent 2 was poised on the dual platforms of Mormonism and feminism. Along with Claudia, Judy Dushku claimed that Mormon women were feminists in the book Mormon Sisters, in her chapter. And Sonia Johnson claimed the word feminism in Mormons for ERA. These three set real precedent for owning our feminism in deed and in word, using the word. It was particularly Judy Dushku's essay, simply titled Feminists, that gave me the confidence to move ahead and apply feminism and feminist theology as labels, tools, and categories for analyzing and reanalyzing Mormon women's history. I would not have had the courage to publish an entire anthology focused on feminism and feminist theology without the foundational chapter written by Judy Dushku in Mormon Sisters and that book. That's why I call her Mama Judy. Judy's essay and the book Mormon Sisters gave me permission to move ahead and publish work that was more daring and dangerous and did indeed get patriarchal pushback. In the 33 years since then, Claudia's work and mentoring, as well as Judy's and the other women on this panel and other women not on this panel, have always been there for me whenever I needed it. In 2003, Claudia invited me to share my research with her students in her summer seminar at BYU, where I was able to unload a bunch of research I didn't know what to do with and help other students use it to further their work. In the early 2000s, I was frustrated by the lack of a central women's resource. And so Claudia connected me with the BYU librarians to create the Mormon Women's Studies resource at BYU so that a feminist heretic could help BYU, right? And later, not long after that, when I desired to return to school and grad school after years away due to excommunication, religious migration, and taking care of two parents in decline, Claudia absolutely urged me to go back to school, saying, Maxine, you've got to take the main chance. Seize the main chance and run with it. That's one of my favorite pieces of advice from Claudia. However, my favorite Claudia advice these last 30 years has been her feminist clarion call to all of us. Carry on, carry on. For all of these reasons, I see Claudia as the mother of modern Mormon women's history and studies, along with our extraordinary feminist mothers. I thank them all.